In 1975, Michael Jackson stood at the edge of the only musical home he'd ever known and walked away from it. Motown Records, the label that turned 5 kids from Gary, Indiana into international superstars, was about to lose them forever. Gordy had built an empire on their voices. Behind the scenes, there was a betrayal so deep, a financial squeeze so brutal, that the Jacksons decided the risk of starting over was safer than staying. What happened in that room changed the trajectory of music history. Here are 10 reasons Michael Jackson and his brothers refused to renew their Motown contract, and reason number 1 will tell you exactly how little of their own success they were allowed to keep. Reason number 1. It started with money. Or more specifically, the lack of it. The Jackson 5 were one of the best-selling acts in Motown's history, racking up 4 consecutive #1 singles right out of the gate in 1970. I Want You Back, ABC, The Love You Save. I'll Be There. No group, anywhere in the industry, had ever opened a career with that kind of unbroken momentum. And yet, despite filling Motown's vaults with hit after hit, year after year, the brothers were reportedly receiving a royalty rate of around just 6%. Split 5 ways between all of them, and that figure was before Motown deducted production costs and other expenses off the top. 6%. For the group that was single-handedly carrying the label's commercial momentum through the early 70s, while older acts on the roster slowly faded from the charts, Michael was still a child, technically. Watching his family's music sell out arenas across the country, while the checks coming home told a very different, much smaller story. The Motown acts whispered about the same imbalance behind closed doors, but the Jacksons were the biggest sellers of the entire roster, which made the gap between their success and their actual earnings impossible to ignore or explain away. Joe Jackson, who managed the boys' business affairs with an iron grip, began quietly exploring what other labels might be willing to offer a group this hot. He ran the numbers over and over, comparing royalty structures, production deals, and ownership terms from competing labels circling outside Motown's walls. The math, by any honest accounting, simply didn't add up anymore. 5 boys filling stadiums and topping charts deserved more than pocket change wrapped in a contract written before some of them had even hit puberty. And that uncomfortable math problem, sitting quietly in the background for years, was about to collide head-on with something even bigger. Reason number 2. Motown didn't just produce the Jackson 5's records, it controlled nearly every creative decision happening behind them, from the songs they recorded down to the outfits they wore on stage. Gordy's assembly line hit machine had worked brilliantly through the 60s, pairing in-house songwriters and producers with Motown's roster to churn out chart topper after chart topper with almost factory-like precision. But by the mid-1970s, Michael was growing up fast and growing increasingly restless inside a system built for obedient performers, not curious young artists. He wanted to write, he wanted to produce, he wanted a real say in the sound of his own music. Instead of simply showing up to perform whatever had been handed to him in the studio that day. Motown's rigid system left almost no room for that kind of creative input from its artists, let alone from a teenager. No matter how clearly talented he was proving himself to be in front of millions. The label's hit-making formula treated artists less like collaborators and more like instruments inside a much larger machine. Interchangeable parts feeding a sound that Gordy and his producers had already decided on. For Michael, who was already writing songs privately in his spare time and absorbing every detail of the recording process he could observe, this creative ceiling felt suffocating rather than safe. He didn't just want to sing the hits that Motown handed him. He wanted to help build them from the ground up, to understand the machinery, to have a hand in shaping the very sound that was making him famous. And at Motown, no matter how much success he brought through the door, that particular door stayed firmly, frustratingly shut. It was a strange kind of trap. Wildly famous, commercially unstoppable, and still treated like a child who needed to be told exactly what to sing, how to sing it, and when. That contradiction would only grow louder in Michael's mind as the decade wore on.
Here's something most people don't realize. Only about 10% of you watching will hit subscribe. The other 90% just watch and move on. You made it this far, so you're clearly not most people. Hit subscribe. Back to the countdown.
Reason number 3. Then came the name. Berry Gordy had registered the Jackson 5 as a trademark belonging legally to Motown Records, not to the Jackson family, who had built that name into a household word. This meant that even if the brothers walked away from the label entirely, they could lose the right to perform under the very name that had made them famous.
Is this thing called ABC?
Yes.
In living rooms across the world. It was a legal maneuver that stunned the family the moment they fully grasped its implications. Sitting around a table, realizing the brand they thought belonged to them legally belonged to someone else. Years of building a global identity. A brand built on 5 faces, 5 voices, matching outfits, synchronized choreography, and one unforgettable name,
I think this is probably the first time this record has been played.
plastered across album covers and concert posters, and Motown, not the Jacksons, held the actual paperwork. For Joe Jackson, this wasn't just a contract dispute anymore, over royalty percentages or studio time. It had become a fight over identity itself, over who truly owned the thing the family had spent years sweating, rehearsing, and sacrificing to build. The brothers would eventually be forced to rebrand entirely, dropping Jackson 5 for the Jacksons once they finally left, losing a piece of their own history in the process. A strange erasure, considering how hard they'd fought to make that original name mean something. But in the moment, the trademark issue became one of the clearest, coldest signs that Motown viewed the group not as partners sharing in mutual success, but as property, to be controlled, licensed, and ultimately retained on the label's terms alone. Regardless of what the family itself wanted, it was a lesson in fine print that Michael would carry with him for the rest of his career, a lesson about reading contracts before signing them, and about who really controls a legacy once the cameras stop rolling. Reason number 4. Michael watched older Motown legends closely and took mental notes on every move they made. He saw how some of the label's biggest stars, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, had fought their own long, exhausting battles with Berry Gordy over creative freedom, royalty rates, and fair compensation for the music they were pouring their lives into. Stevie Wonder's high-profile renegotiation in the early 70s, which famously won him unprecedented creative control, along with ownership of his own master recordings, became something of a blueprint in Michael's young mind for what was actually possible. If an artist pushed back hard enough and refused to simply accept the standard deal, if Stevie, a Motown veteran, could win that kind of leverage through sheer persistence, and leaving briefly before re-signing on his own terms, why couldn't the Jacksons do something similar, especially given how much revenue they were generating for the label? The lesson wasn't lost on a young performer who was already absorbing every business lesson available to him, soaking up details most teenagers would never think to notice. Michael wasn't just a singer anymore, content to show up and perform on command. He was quietly becoming a student of the very industry that had raised him from childhood. Watching contracts, watching negotiations, watching which artists gained power and which ones stayed trapped. And that growing education was telling him, loudly and clearly, that Motown's existing terms were not some fixed, untouchable ceiling. They were simply the starting offer, the opening move in a much longer negotiation that other artists before him had already proven could be won. That realization alone that the rules of the game were negotiable was about to change everything for Michael and his brothers, and for the family patriarch, already counting the days until their contract came up for renewal. Reason number 5. CBS Records came calling, and what they offered stood in stark, almost jarring contrast to the terms Motown had kept in place for years. Through their Epic Records imprint, CBS dangled significantly higher royalty rates than the Jacksons had ever seen. Greater creative control over recording and production decisions, and crucially, ownership opportunities the family had never once been offered during their entire run at Motown. For a family that had spent years watching their earnings squeezed thinner and thinner, and their creative voice silenced in favor of the label's house style, this wasn't just a marginally better deal sitting on the table. It was, in many ways, the deal Motown should have offered years earlier. Back when the hits were already piling up and the leverage was already in the Jacksons' favor. If anyone there had been willing to acknowledge it. Joe Jackson, ever the sharp-eyed negotiator looking for the next advantage, recognized an opening the moment he saw one cross his desk. The conversations with CBS reportedly began quietly, carefully, away from Motown's notice, as the family weighed just how serious this new offer truly was, and whether it was worth the risk of walking away from everything familiar. There was real fear involved too. Motown was the only industry home the boys had ever known. The place where they'd learned to record, to tour, to become stars in the first place. But the numbers CBS was putting forward were too significant to dismiss out of hand. And slowly, meeting by meeting, the family began leaning toward a future outside the only label that had ever signed them. The offer wasn't just attractive on paper anymore, it was starting to feel inevitable. Even Joe, cautious by nature, began to sense that staying loyal to Motown out of sentiment alone could cost the family the financial future they deserved. Reason number 6. Berry Gordy did not take the news well once it became unmistakably clear that the Jacksons were serious about leaving the label that had made them stars. Motown attempted to retain the group, putting together counter-offers meant to close the gap that had opened over years of mounting dissatisfaction. But those offers reportedly fell short of what CBS was already putting on the table. And short of what the family now believed they deserved after everything they'd brought to Motown's bottom line. What followed was tension that didn't stay contained behind closed doors. It spilled into the press, into industry whispers, and into the family's relationship with the only label they had ever known since Michael was barely old enough to read a contract. The split wasn't going to be clean, and everyone involved seemed to sense it. Motown had built so much of its commercial success through the early to mid-70s on the back of this one family. This one group of brothers from Gary, Indiana, and losing them wasn't just an emotional blow to Gordy personally. It was a serious business problem, one that threatened to expose just how dependent the label had become on a single act. Gordy reportedly fought hard to keep what leverage he could, leaning on personal relationships, business pressure, and legal language buried deep in the original contracts. But the trust between the two sides had already eroded too far to rebuild through counteroffers alone. Once a family starts comparing what they're owed against what they're actually receiving, there's rarely a number large enough to make them forget the years spent feeling shortchanged in the first place. Gordy had built an empire on discovering raw talent and shaping it into something extraordinary. But empires built that way eventually face the moment when the talent realizes its own worth. And for the Jacksons, that moment had finally, unmistakably arrived. Reason number 7. Jermaine Jackson, Michael's older brother, made a decision that fractured the family dynamic in a way none of them had fully anticipated. When the CBS negotiations first began, Jermaine had married Berry Gordy's daughter, Hazel Gordy, several years earlier, and when the rest of the brothers chose to leave for CBS and a new future at Epic Records, Jermaine chose to stay behind at Motown, loyal to his father-in-law and to the label that had effectively become family in more ways than one over the years. This meant the group moving forward into this new chapter would not be the same 5 brothers fans had grown up watching on television and in concert halls since 1969. Randy Jackson, the youngest sibling, who had been performing alongside the group informally for some time already, stepped in to fill the gap. That Jermaine's departure had left behind in the lineup. For Michael, losing a brother from the act during the single most pivotal business decision of his young career added an emotional weight to an already complicated and stressful transition. It wasn't just about contracts and royalty percentages anymore. It was about watching his own brother choose a side, choose Motown and Berry Gordy's family over the brothers he'd performed with since childhood. The Jackson 5 leaving Motown, in this light, wasn't simply a label change executed on paper. It was a genuine family rupture playing out in real time, in front of cameras, in front of fans, and in front of an industry watching closely to see how it would all unfold for the brothers who remained. Family loyalty, business loyalty, and personal loyalty had collided all at once, and there was no version of this decision that would leave every relationship intact. Michael, still only a teenager, was learning a hard lesson about the cost of success at a level few families ever experience. Reason number 8. The trademark dispute over the Jackson 5 name forced an identity crisis the brothers hadn't fully anticipated when they first started discussing a move away from Motown. Unable to use the name that had built their fame across an entire decade, they rebranded as the Jacksons for their new chapter with CBS and Epic Records. It was a small change on paper, just a dropped number. But it represented a massive shift in branding momentum, forcing the group to essentially reintroduce themselves to a global audience under a new banner. Even as they carried the exact same faces, the exact same voices, and the exact same chemistry fans already knew and loved from years of watching them grow up on stage. Michael, still a teenager carrying the weight of being the group's clear breakout star and most recognizable face, now had to help rebuild brand recognition almost from scratch in some markets, all while proving to a skeptical industry that the new deal was actually worth the risk the family had taken in walking away from Motown's machinery. Radio programmers had to be reminded who the Jacksons were. Magazine editors had to update years of editorial shorthand. Fans had to adjust to seeing a name they'd grown up with quietly disappear from album covers and replaced with something new. Something that sounded similar, but carried a different legal and commercial identity entirely. It was a strange position for a group at the absolute peak of their popularity to find themselves in. Rebuilding recognition, rather than simply riding the wave they had already built so carefully over the better part of a decade. But the family had made their decision, and there was no turning back now. Only the work of making the new name mean just as much as the old one once had. Reason number 9. Despite the contract clearly approaching its expiration and the family's intent to leave growing more obvious by the week, Motown didn't let go easily, and certainly didn't let go quietly. Legal entanglements over the trademark, over remaining contractual obligations, and over outstanding business matters dragged the process out for far longer than anyone in the Jackson family had hoped for.
Jackson 5, so let's have a fine
Creating a messy, drawn-out transition rather than the clean break they'd been imagining when the CBS conversations first started. The brothers found themselves fighting battles on two fronts simultaneously.
I gave him my cookie.
Building fresh momentum with their new label while still being legally tied up in disputes with their old one. A frustrating limbo that ate into both their time and their focus during what should have been an exciting new beginning.
So one day, and that was Monday, and I stepped.
Lawyers on both sides exchanged letters. Executives traded accusations through industry publications. The public, for the most part,
During finger pain.
only saw fragments of what was really happening behind the scenes, glimpses of a much larger and more complicated legal reality. For Michael, this meant the genuine excitement of a fresh start at CBS, of finally having more creative control over his own music, was constantly shadowed by unfinished business back at Motown, a persistent reminder that walking away from a contract didn't automatically mean walking away cleanly or quickly. Even after the announcement was public and the brothers were technically free, paperwork and legal disputes continued trailing behind them, like an unwelcome shadow that refused to fully disappear. well into the start of their new chapter with Epic Records. It was a reminder that even a justified exit, backed by better numbers and a better deal, could still come with a price measured in time, stress, and lingering uncertainty. The Jacksons would eventually walk through it cleanly, but the road there was longer, harder, and far less glamorous than the headlines about their new contract ever let on. Reason number 10. In the end, the move to CBS and Epic Records didn't just resolve the Jacksons' long list of grievances against Motown. It quietly set the stage for the most explosive solo career in the history of recorded music. Freed from Motown's restrictive royalty structure and the creative limitations that had frustrated him for years, Michael began working on solo material with a level of input and control he'd never been given before, sketching out ideas that would eventually lead to Off the Wall in 1979, and just a few years after that, to Thriller, the best-selling album of all time, a record that would redefine what global pop stardom could even look like. The very frustrations that pushed the family out of Motown's doors back in 1975, the demand for creative control, the demand for fair compensation, and the demand for genuine ownership over their own sound and their own image became the foundation Michael built his entire solo empire on top of, brick by brick, album by album.
The force, it's got a lot of power.
Walking away from the only label they had ever known wasn't the end of the Jackson story, as some industry insiders quietly predicted it might be at the time. It was, instead, the beginning of the most legendary chapter in it. A chapter that would eventually make Michael Jackson a name recognized in nearly every corner of the world, far beyond anything Motown's machinery, however brilliant in its own right, could have ever produced on its own terms. Sometimes the riskiest decision a young artist can make turns out, years later, to be the only decision that ever truly made sense. Creation. And every uncertain headline, 1975 wasn't the year they lost Motown. It was the year they found themselves.
Shine.